You fought bravely. But you're not alone. Human joins exhausted alien girl in battle. HFY sci-fi. The alien world was ablaze with the remnants of the battle. The once lush, vibrant forests were now charred and smoking, the air thick with the acrid scent of burning vegetation and the sharp sting of gunpowder. Above, the sky was a swirling mess of dark clouds and flashes of lightning. The invasion had been relentless, a storm of technology and firepower that seemed unstoppable. Yet, amidst the chaos, two figures stood their ground. One was an alien girl, her blue skin marred with cuts and dirt, her breathing heavy as she staggered against a battered tree. She was the last of her people, or so it seemed. The war had drained her. Her arm hung limp at her side, the energy blade she once wielded now dim and flickering, its glow barely noticeable. Her eyes, normally bright and full of determination, now held the weight of 1,000 failed battles. The other figure was human, a soldier in a world not his own, a member of the Interstellar Defense Corps, sent here to help protect the alien race from a ruthless enemy. He was dressed in battle armor, his helmet pulled back to reveal his weathered face. Blood, both his and the aliens', stained his clothes, and his rifle was slung low on his back. He, too, had seen enough to last a lifetime. He was exhausted, but where the alien girl had faltered, he hadn't given up yet. The sounds of battle had died down, leaving only the faint hum of distant weapons and the crackle of fires. The enemy was regrouping, but they would be back soon. You fought bravely, the human said, his voice a gravelly rasp from exhaustion. But you're not alone. The alien girl turned her head slowly, her violet eyes locking onto his. There was a flicker of something in them, hope, perhaps, or disbelief. It had been so long since she'd seen a friendly face, let alone one that wasn't ready to abandon her to the battlefield. Why? Her voice was weak, barely more than a whisper. Why are you still here? The human stepped forward, his boots crunching the brittle ground. He knelt beside her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder, offering both reassurance and a promise. Because, he said, his voice firm, we fight together. You're not alone. His words hung in the air, and for a moment, the alien girl seemed to struggle with them. Her species was not one to trust easily. They had always fought alone, never relying on outsiders. They had learned the hard way that alliances often ended in betrayal. Yet something about this human's presence stirred a different kind of resolve inside her. I thought we had lost, she murmured, looking up at the dark sky, her eyes reflecting the burning remnants of the battle. We haven't lost, the human replied, his hand tightening on her shoulder. We're not done yet. The fight isn't over. The alien girl took a deep, shuddering breath. Her energy blade flickered back to life, its blue light pulsing weakly as she struggled to rise to her feet. But it was clear that she couldn't do this alone anymore. The toll of the war, the loss of her people, had drained her to the very core. You're strong, the human said, his voice soft but resolute. But we're stronger together. I've got your back. The girl's eyes met his once more, this time with something more, trust. Slowly, she stood, her legs unsteady but her will unbroken. The alien species was known for their resilience, but even they could only take so much. The human reached for his rifle and handed it to her, the grip worn but reliable. Here, he said, this is your fight, too. She took the rifle, her fingers curling around it with surprising strength. There was a moment of silence as the two of them stood there, one human, one alien, bound by a shared resolve, a shared purpose. Then, a distant roar broke the quiet, followed by the unmistakable hum of the enemy's weapons powering up. They were coming, and this time, they would face them together. The alien girl nodded, her face now filled with renewed determination. She raised her rifle, and the human, already moving into position beside her, adjusted his helmet. Let's finish this, he said, his voice steady. Together, they turned toward the approaching storm. The war might not be over, but they knew this, no matter how fierce the enemy, no matter how overwhelming the odds, they weren't alone, and that made all the difference. As they stepped into the chaos once more, side by side, it was clear that the tide of battle had shifted. There was no power greater than the unity forged between them, a human and an alien, fighting not just for survival, but for each other. The fight wasn't over, but together, they would win it. You fought bravely, But you're not alone, human joins exhausted alien girl in battle. HFY, sci-fi, continued. The battlefield was a war zone. The once beautiful landscape now a twisted ruin. The enemy forces, a vicious coalition of alien invaders known as the Koroth, had come with overwhelming firepower, intent on wiping out the peaceful civilizations that had lived on this world for centuries. They had underestimated the resilience of the native species, the Veridax, but they had not counted on the human soldier who had arrived as part of a broader intergalactic defense force. Now, as the hum of enemy drones echoed from the distance, the two of them, human and alien, were ready to stand against the coming storm. The alien girl, whose name was Lyra, felt the familiar surge of adrenaline course through her. Despite her exhaustion, she had fought so many battles that her body had become a battlefield itself, bruised, battered, and weary. But in the presence of this human, she felt something awakening within her, hope, and a burning determination to protect the last of her people, even if it meant her life. The human soldier, who had introduced himself as Captain Nathan Drake, kept his focus on the horizon, his eyes scanning for movement. He had seen war before, in distant stars and forgotten worlds. But this felt different. This wasn't just a battle for survival, it was a stand against annihilation. And Lyra had become more than just a battle companion. She was a symbol of everything worth fighting for. "We need to hold them off long enough for the reinforcements to arrive," Nathan said, checking the charge on his plasma rifle. "I'm assuming your people have some sort of backup plan?" Lyra nodded, but her expression remained grim. "There are only a few of us left. Most of the fleet was destroyed in the first wave. What remains is spread thin across the galaxy." Her voice wavered for a moment, but she quickly regained control. "But you're right, we need to hold them here. This planet is all we have left." Nathan understood the weight of her words. The Veridax had been an advanced species, proud and noble, but they had been caught off guard by the Karotha's ruthless assault. Their once great armies had crumbled, their cities had fallen, and their way of life was on the brink of extinction. The reinforcements were their last hope. "We'll give them a reason to think twice," Nathan said, slamming a fresh power pack into his rifle. "No one's going down without a fight." Lyra's eyes glinted as she held her weapon steady. "We fight to the last. We always do." And fight they did. The first wave of the Koroth appeared over the ridge, a massive, insectoid horde, their bodies armored in black exoskeletons, their weapons crackling with dangerous energy. Their screeches filled the air as they charged forward, intent on overwhelming the two defenders. Nathan and Lyra didn't flinch. They opened fire together, the synchronized blasts of their rifles lighting up the darkening landscape. The Koroth fell back in disarray, but their numbers were overwhelming. More continued to surge from the shadows, each one faster and more vicious than the last. Nathan fired again, his shots precise, taking down Koroth soldiers in rapid succession. But even as the enemy fell, more seemed to appear, drawn by the commotion of battle. Lyra fought with her usual grace, her energy blade now humming with deadly power. She moved fluidly, slicing through enemy ranks with devastating efficiency. But even she could see the tide of battle beginning to shift. "They keep coming," Nathan shouted over the roar of gunfire. His rifle clicked empty. "Don't stop," Lyra yelled back, her voice fierce. "We can't let them push us back." She darted forward, her blade cutting through the Koroth like a whirlwind. But her energy was waning, the pain in her arm was growing, and her movements were starting to slow. The weight of the war, of the countless lives lost, pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy burden. Nathan saw her falter, just for a split second, but it was enough. He moved toward her, grabbing her arm and pulling her behind cover. "You need to rest," he said urgently, panting from exertion. "We can't afford you getting hurt." "I'm fine," she insisted, though her voice trembled with exhaustion. "No, you're not," Nathan replied. He looked around, his mind working quickly. "We need to regroup. I've got a plan. Stay with me." He dragged her to a nearby trench, pulling her down beside him as the sounds of the Koroth closing in grew louder. For a moment, there was silence. Both of them were breathing heavily, trying to regain some strength. "You're not alone," Nathan said, looking at her. His words were simple but carried the weight of everything he had come to understand in this fight. "I'm not going anywhere." Lyra looked at him, her violet eyes searching his face. She had seen soldiers fight for glory, for their own survival, or even for money, but this human, Nathan, fought because he believed in something more than himself. He believed in unity, in the power of standing together against impossible odds. "You're right," she said softly. "I had forgotten what it meant to trust someone else." Nathan's hand briefly touched her shoulder in reassurance. "You can trust me. We'll make it through this, together." Just as they prepared to make their final stand, a sudden roar split the air, a sound unlike any they had heard before. It was followed by the unmistakable hum of dropships and the crackle of energy weapons. Reinforcements. A fleet of human warships descended from the sky, their cannons firing in unison, cutting through the Karath forces like a hot knife through butter. The battlefield was soon filled with the roar of battle from both sides, but the momentum had shifted. The Karath, now caught in a crossfire, began to retreat, their once imposing forces breaking under the weight of the human onslaught. Liare's eyes widened in disbelief. She had never thought she would see this moment, a moment of victory. Nathan turned to her, his eyes filled with relief and determination. "We've got this," he said with a grin. "Now, let's finish it." Together, they rose, joining the fray once again. With the Karath retreating, the combined might of the human and Veridax forces pushed forward, and the war for this planet turned in their favor. The battle wasn't over, but it was no longer a question of if they would win, it was a matter of when. As they fought side by side, Liare couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude. She had come to this war alone, believing that her species' survival was a solitary burden. But now, she knew better. "You were right," she said, her voice steady as she swung her blade through the last of the Karath. "I wasn't alone." Nathan gave her a nod, his face full of pride. "And neither are you now." The battle raged on, but the outcome had already been decided. They would win, together. The fight wasn't just for survival anymore, it was for the future. And it was a future built on unity, trust, and the strength of fighting side by side. "You fought bravely. But you're not alone," Human joins exhausted alien girl in battle. HFY, sci-fi, continued. The final Karath forces began to crumble under the unrelenting onslaught from the combined human and Veridax forces. The tide had turned, but the battlefield was still a chaotic, fiery mess. The hum of energy rifles, the roar of dropships overhead, and the screeches of the Karath as they fell back filled the air. It was a moment of triumph, but there was still no time to rest. Nathan Drake and Liare fought on, relentless in their pursuit of victory. Nathan's rifle was now an extension of himself, an instrument of precision as he picked off the last Karath soldiers in his line of sight. He moved with calculated efficiency, switching seamlessly between offense and defense as his alien counterpart worked alongside him, her energy blade cutting through the air with deadly grace. Liare, though visibly weary, had regained the fire that had briefly faltered. There was something about the way Nathan fought, the way he never wavered, that reignited something deep inside her. She had always believed in the strength of her people, but now, she understood what Nathan had meant. Unity, trust. It wasn't just her fight, it was theirs. But victory was a fleeting thing in war. As the last of the Karath forces scattered, a new threat emerged on the horizon. The sky darkened even further as massive warships, far larger than anything they had faced before, dropped from the clouds, their engines roaring with an ominous hum. They were the Karatha's true battle fleet, the ones that had been waiting in the shadows, biding their time for this very moment. "More of them?" Liare whispered, disbelief in her voice. She had never expected their retreat to be so short-lived. These new ships were massive, towering behemoths of war. "They're not done yet," Nathan said grimly, his face tightening with determination. "We don't stop fighting until the last one is gone." Liare nodded, her grip tightening on her energy blade. She was exhausted, every fiber of her being urging her to collapse. But there was no time for rest. The human beside her, despite the blood, the wounds, and the sheer exhaustion painted across his face, stood tall, resolute, ready to face this new challenge. "Where's the fleet?" she asked, looking toward the distant horizon, her voice tinged with frustration. The Veridax's last hope had been their fleet, scattered and weakened, but still capable of turning the tide if they could only arrive in time. "They're still scattered," Nathan answered, his eyes scanning the approaching enemy fleet. "But we've got something better. These dropships are loaded with the best firepower the human fleet can offer. We'll have to hold them off long enough for our backup to get here." He turned to Lyra, his face hardening with resolve. You ready for this? Lyra's gaze hardened as well, despite the pain, despite the crushing weight of responsibility pressing down on her. She stood taller. I was born ready. With a shared nod, the two of them moved to take up their positions on the ridge, their weapons raised once more. The sky now erupted with flashes of laser fire as the enemy warships began to unload. Massive turrets fired with blistering heat, sending fiery trails across the sky. The Koroth were methodical, intelligent. They knew how to press the attack, how to target weak points, but what they hadn't accounted for was the fierce resistance that Nathan and Lyra would present, side by side. Nathan's rifle cracked, sending shot after shot into the advancing warships. Each burst of plasma from his gun ignited enemy drones, sending them crashing to the ground in fiery explosions. His movements were a dance of skill and precision, each shot calculated, each movement deliberate. Lyra, ever the agile warrior, darted in and out of cover, her energy blade flashing with the light of 1,000 stars. She sliced through enemy drones and Koroth foot soldiers with terrifying speed, her strength renewed by her bond with the human beside her. Together, they made an unstoppable force. But even their combined strength wasn't enough to take on the overwhelming Koroth fleet. The enemy warships loomed closer, their massive cannons locking onto the ground below. The first volley of heavy fire rained down, sending shockwaves through the ground. Lyra was thrown back by the blast, her body slamming into the dirt. Nathan, she shouted, scrambling to her feet, but her vision was blurred. The shockwave had knocked the breath from her lungs, and her head swam with dizziness. Nathan's voice came to her through the chaos, calm and steady. I've got you. He was at her side in an instant, pulling her to her feet. There was a flash of bright light above them as a new wave of enemy fire tore through the air. But Nathan was already moving, guiding Lyra to a safer position. Stay close, he said, his voice a low growl of determination. We're not letting them win this. In that moment, Lyra felt something shift within her. She had always fought for her people, for the survival of her race. But this was different. This wasn't just a fight to preserve a species. This was a fight for everything she had believed in and everything she had come to care about. It was a fight for a future. The distant hum of dropships filled the air once again, but this time, they weren't the Koroth. The human fleet had arrived. Reinforcements, Nathan said with a grin, his eyes lighting up. Let's give them hell. With the backup now in full force, the battle entered its final phase. Dropships landed with thunderous force, disgorging human soldiers and powerful tanks that tore through the Koroth lines like a knife through paper. The skies above filled with the roaring fire of human weaponry, missiles, plasma bursts, and energy cannons. The Koroth fleet, once so confident in their overwhelming power, now found themselves caught between two unstoppable forces. The human fleet hit them from above, while Nathan, Lyra, and the rest of the remaining defenders fought tooth and nail on the ground. The Koroth began to retreat, the tide turning decisively in favor of the defenders. One by one, the enemy ships fell from the sky, crashing into the earth in a shower of fire and metal. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the battlefield fell silent. The Koroth forces had been utterly defeated. Lyra looked around, her breath heavy, her body sore, but her heart filled with a kind of relief she hadn't known in months. The world, though scarred, was still standing. The battle had been won, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, hope began to bloom once more. Nathan walked up beside her, a look of weary satisfaction on his face. We did it. Lyra smiled, just a small, tired smile, but it was enough. Together, she said, her voice a soft affirmation of everything they had achieved. Nathan nodded, the weight of the victory settling in. Together, as they looked out over the battlefield, the skies cleared for the first time in days. The stars above began to shine brightly once again, as if the universe itself was honoring their hard-fought victory. They had won, not just for themselves, but for the future, for the possibility of a better tomorrow. And it was all because they had fought together. The war wasn't over, but they had found something more important than victory. They had found a family, and together, they would rebuild. You fought bravely. But you're not alone. Human joins exhausted alien girl in battle. HFY, sci-fi, continued. The stars above were clearer than they had been in days. The warships hovered silently in the sky, their weapons powered down, the last vestiges of enemy fire fizzling out as the battlefield began to fall silent. The smoke that had once choked the air now dissipated, and though the landscape was still scarred, the feeling of triumph settled in like a weight lifting from the planet's shoulders. Nathan Drake stood beside Lyra, both of them gazing at the aftermath of their hard-won victory. There was no grand celebration, just the quiet relief that came with the realization that they had turned the tide, not just for their own lives, but for the future of this planet. You know, Nathan said, his voice quieter now, almost reflective, I didn't expect it to go like this. I thought we'd be running for our lives at some point, not standing here together after all this. Lyra turned her head to him, her expression tired but genuine. I didn't expect it either, she replied. I thought I was going to die alone. Nathan gave her a small, rueful smile. Guess we're both full of surprises. Then, a pause lingered between them, heavy with the shared weight of the battle. The Veridax people were few now, their once thriving civilizations shattered, their fleets in tatters, and yet, in the end, they had won. Lyra had been right, despite everything, despite all the pain and loss. They had emerged victorious, and the universe, for a brief moment, felt just a little bit brighter. Where do we go from here? Lyra asked quietly, her voice thoughtful as she scanned the horizon. We rebuild, Nathan said with resolve. It's what we do. It's what everyone does after a war. You don't quit. You don't give up. No matter how much the world changes, you rebuild what's worth saving. And you think that's enough? Lyra asked, her gaze focused on the distant remnants of their world. I think it has to be, Nathan replied, because if you don't rebuild, if you let everything break you, then it's all for nothing. And I know you're not the kind of person who lets everything be for nothing. She met his gaze, her eyes softening with something that could only be described as gratitude. Thank you, she said simply, for being here, for not letting me face this alone. Nathan gave her a small smile, his hand resting on his rifle. You'd have done the same for me. Besides, it's not like I had much of a choice. We were in this together the moment we decided to fight back. Lyra nodded slowly, the realization sinking in. She had never truly believed in the power of allies before. She had always seen strength as something that came from within, from her people, from her culture. But now, standing side by side with this human who had come from across the stars, she realized that perhaps true strength came from connection, from knowing that no matter how impossible the odds, someone else would be there to face them with you. A distant hum reached their ears, and both of them turned toward the sound. It was a series of ships descending from the clouds, human ships, their wings glinting in the sunlight, landing smoothly in the still smoldering fields. The soldiers of the Interstellar Defense Corps began to disembark, their faces weary but hopeful. They were the reinforcements, the ones who had arrived just in time to tip the balance of the war in their favor. Nathan raised a hand in greeting as the lead officer approached, a tall woman with short-cropped hair and a stern look in her eyes. She gave a brief salute before nodding to Nathan. We've got some work to do, the officer said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen countless battles. But it looks like we owe you two a lot. Just doing our part, Nathan replied, his grin still tired but triumphant. He gestured to Lyra. Couldn't have done it without my partner here. The officer's gaze shifted to the alien girl standing beside him, her posture still that of a warrior, though weary from the battle. Impressive, she said with a nod. You don't see a partnership like that often, not in a war like this. Lyra nodded, a small but genuine smile tugging at the corner of her lips. There is strength in numbers. That's what we're here for, the officer replied. Strength in numbers, in unity. Nathan looked over at Lyra, his smile broadening. You hear that? Looks like your people aren't the only ones who believe in strength in unity. Lyra met his gaze, her eyes glimmering with something new, a spark of hope. Not just for her people but for all the races fighting for survival in the galaxy. Maybe we should all start believing in it more often. As the human soldiers began to organize, setting up temporary camps and tending to the wounded, Nathan and Lyra took a moment to step aside, away from the bustle. The planet, though scarred, was still theirs, and while the war had taken much from them, it had also brought them something invaluable, something they hadn't had before, a future. Do you think they'll rebuild? Lyra asked, her voice quiet as they watched the soldiers work. Nathan didn't answer right away. He glanced out at the horizon, his thoughts drifting toward the long path ahead. I think it's going to take time, but if anyone can rebuild, it's people like you, and people like me. He gave her a half-smile. We don't give up. We never do. Liara smiled back, and for the first time in a long while, it was a smile of true peace. The fight was over. The last of the Koroth had retreated, and the world had won. But this wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something new. They would rebuild, together. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape, together. The war had been won, but the greatest battle was just beginning, and this time, they wouldn't face it alone. You fought bravely, but you're not alone. Human joins exhausted alien girl in battle. HFY, sci-fi, finale. The sun began to set, casting long shadows over the war-torn fields where the final battle had raged. The once clear skies were streaked with the fiery hues of twilight, a reminder of how far they had come. The tension that had gripped the planet for so long had finally begun to loosen, replaced by a cautious, tentative peace. Nathan and Liara stood together, watching as the last remnants of the Koroth forces were rounded up and taken into custody. The human fleet had been swift in its final push, but even the greatest of victories often left behind traces of sorrow. There were too many lost lives to count, too many families torn apart, too many cities reduced to rubble. Still, there was a sense of quiet accomplishment. The planet had been saved, but the cost had been high. Liara turned to Nathan, her eyes scanning the field of wreckage and the distant horizon where the last Koroth ships burned in the sky. It's over, she said, her voice almost soft enough to be lost in the wind. Yeah, Nathan agreed, though the word felt too small for everything they had just been through. It's over, but it doesn't feel like it's over, you know? I know, Liara murmured. I thought we would have more time to grieve, to process everything, but the war never gives you that time, does it? No, it doesn't, Nathan said. He exhaled, his breath heavy. You just have to keep moving forward, no matter what's left behind. Liara looked at him, her expression thoughtful. I think I'm starting to understand that now. You're right, we rebuild, or we fall, and I don't plan on falling. Nathan smiled, a hint of pride in his eyes. I don't think anyone's ever going to fall with you around. She chuckled softly, but it was a sound laced with exhaustion. I never realized how much strength I was putting into holding the weight of an entire species on my shoulders. She glanced at him, her gaze steady. I was wrong to think I could do it alone. But you, Nathan, maybe that's what I needed. Someone who didn't ask, but just stood by me. Nathan's smile softened as he met her gaze. I think we were both carrying a lot more than we realized. And now, we don't have to carry it alone. Together, she said, and the word held a deeper meaning now than it ever had before. A distant hum broke the moment of reflection as more ships began to descend from the sky. The reinforcements from the human fleet were being fully mobilized, setting up permanent bases and bringing with them humanitarian supplies, medical teams, and engineers. There was work to be done. The planet would need to be rebuilt, its ecosystems healed, its people helped. The war might be over, but the effort to restore their world would take years. Nathan turned back to face the bustle of activity as soldiers and citizens alike began to mingle in an uneasy camaraderie. He could see the hope flickering in their eyes, the first spark of optimism in the aftermath of the war. It wasn't the kind of hope that came from the promise of a perfect tomorrow. It was the kind of hope that was born out of survival, of shared loss, and of hard-fought victories. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, Nathan said, his tone lighter now as he surveyed the scene. Liara nodded. But we're not alone anymore. She was right. The fight hadn't just been about fighting back against the Koroth, it had been about building something bigger than themselves, something lasting, something that would grow even in the aftermath of war. And maybe, Nathan added with a grin, we can start by teaching the humans how to rebuild cities that don't look like metal skeletons. Liara laughed, the sound of it ringing clear in the stillness of the evening. Maybe not all the way, but it's a start. As the human forces began to coordinate with the Veridak's survivors, working hand in hand to restore their broken world, Nathan and Liara stood side by side. The first steps in rebuilding the planet were already underway. The foundation was being laid, not just for new cities and infrastructure, but for a new way of thinking, a way of unity, of cooperation. They had fought together, And now they would rebuild together. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the future didn't seem so uncertain. There was no guarantee it would be easy or perfect, but there was something stronger than the fear that had once gripped them all. There was trust. There was hope. As the stars began to twinkle above, Lyra placed a hand on Nathan's shoulder. "I think we're going to be all right," she said, her voice a mixture of relief and quiet confidence. "Yeah," Nathan replied, looking up at the endless stretch of stars above. "I think so too." And as the night deepened, they turned back toward the campfire where the first steps of recovery would begin. Together, they faced not only a rebuilt planet but a future that they would shape, side by side, because they had learned one of the most important lessons of all. No one, no matter how strong, had to fight alone. The war was over, and with it, a new chapter had begun. "You fought bravely, but you're not alone," Human joins exhausted alien girl in battle. HFY, Sci-Fi, Epilogue. Months passed, and the planet that had once been ravaged by war slowly began to heal. The scars on the land, though deep, were beginning to fade as new structures rose from the ashes. The cities were rebuilding, but more importantly, the people, both human and Veridax, were learning to live with one another. Their fates now intertwined in a shared destiny. Nathan Drake stood in the middle of what had once been a smoldering battlefield, now transformed into a bustling hub of recovery. He watched as Veridax engineers worked alongside human construction crews to clear rubble, plant crops, and restore the planet's natural resources. It was no easy task, but every day felt like a step toward reclaiming what had been lost. Beside him, Lyra observed the progress with a quiet satisfaction. Her alien skin, though scarred from past battles, now bore a proud glow of someone who had endured and emerged stronger. She was still the fierce warrior she had always been, but the woman she was becoming, this diplomat, this leader, was one forged in the fires of war. "I never imagined we would get this far," she said, her voice carrying both wonder and resolve. Nathan chuckled softly. "I don't think any of us did, but it's happening." They walked together through the newly reconstructed streets, where humans and Veridax shared meals, traded goods, and even laughed together. What had once been a bitter war was now turning into a fragile peace, with the common goal of rebuilding not just cities, but trust between races. "You know," Nathan said, pausing as they approached a group of children playing with a makeshift ball made from alien materials. "When I first arrived here, I thought I was just going to survive. I thought the war would break me, but instead, it made me realize something." Lyra raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "What's that?" "That the fight, it was never really about the war," he said, looking at her meaningfully. "It was about what came after, what we chose to do with the world we were left with." Lyra's eyes softened, and she gave a small nod. "And we've chosen well." Nathan glanced down at her, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, together, we've done something incredible, something no one thought was possible." Their steps took them toward the heart of the newly established Veridax Human Coalition headquarters, where representatives from both species were meeting to form a lasting alliance. Though there were still tensions to overcome, lingering distrust, cultural differences, the foundation had been laid. They had worked side by side through the worst of it, and now, they were forging a future none of them could have imagined before. As they entered the building, they were met by Captain Taylor, the commanding officer of the human fleet. She smiled warmly at them, the weariness in her eyes now tempered by pride. "Good to see you both," Captain Taylor greeted them. "Looks like we might actually pull this off after all." Lyra nodded, though her eyes lingered on the documents spread across the table before them. "It's going to take time. We're not out of the woods yet, but we've built a foundation for something better." "I think the hardest part is over," Nathan said, his expression serious. "Now, it's all about keeping that momentum going." The captain laughed softly. "Yeah, the easy part is always pretending the work's done, but it's clear to me that we've got a good team now, and a good future ahead of us." They all gathered around the table, planning for the future of their newly formed coalition, determining how to best integrate the resources, cultures, and technologies of both species. The work was far from done, but there was a new energy in the air. The hope wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about thriving. As the meeting drew to a close, Nathan and Lyra stepped outside, looking over the land that had once been a battlefield. now transformed into a place of promise. The horizon stretched wide before them, full of possibilities. I used to think the universe was just a cold, indifferent place, Nathan said, his tone pensive as he looked out over the land. But now I see that maybe the universe is what we make of it. We choose to stand up, to fight, to rebuild, and that's what matters. Lyra nodded, turning to him with a soft smile, and we choose to do it together. That's what makes all the difference. The two of them stood there, side by side, watching as the last rays of sunlight bathed the world in a golden glow. Their journey hadn't been easy. It had been filled with hardship, sacrifice, and loss, but it had also been filled with victories not just over enemies, but over the darkness that had threatened to consume them all. The planet had been saved, but more than that, a new future had been forged, one where trust, unity, and cooperation would be the foundation for all that came next. Lyra placed a hand on Nathan's shoulder, her touch steady and sure. I think we've finally found something worth fighting for. Nathan looked at her, his eyes filled with respect and understanding. Yeah, we have. Together, they turned toward the future, ready for whatever it held, because in the end, they had learned one thing above all else, that no matter how dark the road, no one had to walk it alone. And with that, the legacy of their fight, and the beginning of a new era, began.